Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Mollie. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Mollie. I post true crime videos like this every single week, so if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe. And don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about a solved case from the state of South Carolina, when a bright and beautiful university student just suddenly vanished after a night out in the spring of 2019. Her friends, family and the authorities immediately sprung into action to try and work out what had happened to her. When the investigation took a tragic turn and developed into a murder inquiry, the hunt for this young woman's killer was swiftly launched, and it didn't take long at all for a top suspect to be apprehended and identified. And as police began looking further into his movements prior to the crime taking place, they realised that he was probably out that night looking for someone that he could abduct, and he struck lucky when his victim accidentally mistook his vehicle for an Uber, a taxi that she had booked. She believed that this car she had gotten into was going to take her safely back home, but actually it was a car journey that would result in her brutal and horrific death. Join me as we delve into the tragic case of Samantha Josephson. So for this week's case, we are going back more than 6 years now to the spring of 2019 in Columbia, the capital city of the state of South Carolina in the US. However, Columbia is not where Samantha's story begins. You see, she was actually from Princeton in New Jersey. That's where she was born, but she was raised in the area of Robbinsville in New Jersey. Samantha Lee Josephson, who also went by Sammy, was born on the 13th of August 1997 to her parents Seymour and Marcy Josephson, and she was one of 2 children. She had a big sister named Sydney who was about 20 months older than her, and it would appear as though Sydney and Samantha had a very normal, happy childhood with their parents, and Sydney and Samantha seemed to be very close as they were growing up. They were also good friends as well as sisters, but they were very, very different. Sydney said that while she was always the more serious and I guess careful one growing up, her little sister was the complete and utter opposite. Samantha was very outgoing, very carefree, almost fearless. Her mother Marcy said that she was never scared to try anything. She was always a very adventurous little girl, and Samantha was also very active and sporty. She always had a lot of energy. She was bubbly and friendly. Her father Seymour described how when Samantha walked into a room, you just knew that she was there. She just kind of grabbed everyone's attention. Samantha always did very well in school growing up, and in her teenage years, once she had graduated from high school, she made the very big decision to move more than 600 miles away from her home in New Jersey to South Carolina for college. She became a student at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, where she studied political science, and she also had dreams and plans to attend law school in the future. Specifically, she wanted to study international law. She was a very, very intelligent young woman, and I can imagine that it would have been difficult for Sammy to move to South Carolina initially, move so far away from her family and her friends, but thankfully she soon settled into her new life as a uni student, and she loved it. She loved being in South Carolina. She quickly made new uni friends, and by the time this case occurred in the spring of 2019, she was a senior and she was just weeks away from graduating with her degree in political science. During spring break of 2019, Samantha and her uni girlfriends all decided to go on a trip together. They went to Florida, and Samantha's friends said that they all had a really, really amazing time, and then when they returned to Columbia, they got stuck back into their uni work and they started getting ready for their graduation. However, tragically, graduation was a huge event in 21-year-old Samantha Josephson's life that she would never actually get to witness. She would never receive her diploma for all of the hard work that she put into her political science studies due to the horrific events that unfolded on the night of the 29th of March 2019. The day before this, the 28th of March 2019, Samantha and her uni friends, her dorm mates, had decided to all go on a night out together to again celebrate their upcoming graduation, and to also celebrate the fact that Sammy had gotten into law school. After graduating, she was due to become a student at the Drexel University of Law in Pennsylvania. She'd been accepted on a a full scholarship there, which, as you can imagine, she was incredibly excited about. So yeah, they all decided to go on this night out together to celebrate Sammy. They got ready in their dorms. Samantha was wearing some black jeans and an orange top, and then eventually that Thursday evening they headed to the 5 Points district in Columbia. They would often go there on their nights out. There were a lot of bars and clubs, and so of course it was very, very popular amongst university students. So Sammy and her friends went to the 5 Points district. Specifically, they went to a bar called the Bird Dog Bar. They were having drinks, dancing, having a laugh. Throughout the night, Samantha was also in constant communication with her boyfriend. She had a boyfriend named Greg, and they'd been together for about 2 years by this point. Greg had also been a student at the University of South Carolina, although he had graduated the year prior in 2018. So by this point in 2019, he was, I think, back in his hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. So they weren't as close by anymore, but again, they still kept in constant contact while Samantha finished her uni studies. And actually, Greg planned to move to Pennsylvania with Samantha when she went to law school there, so they were very serious about one another, clearly. But I digress. Like I said, during her night out on the 28th of March 2019, Samantha was having fun with her friends, but she was also regularly texting and calling her boyfriend Greg. She'd actually been trying to convince him to travel to Columbia to come and see her that night because she was missing him, but Greg said no. He was due to be seeing her in just 2 days' time anyway. She was going to be going to Charleston for the weekend, so he said that they would see each other soon enough. Samantha and her uni friends spent the early hours of the Friday morning drinking, dancing, having fun in the bar, and then at around 2 a.m. on the 29th of March 2019, the friends kind of started to separate, it seems. One of Samantha's friends, Jacqueline, wasn't feeling too great from drinking, so she decided to leave the bar and go home, and Samantha stayed for a little bit longer until eventually she also decided to leave. So she said goodbye to her friends who were staying at the bar, and she booked herself an Uber, a taxi or rideshare, to take her back to her dorm, which is something that she did often after her nights out. Her father, Seymour, had actually given Samantha access to his credit card so that she would have the money to pay for Ubers and get home safely after her nights out drinking. So yeah, she booked herself an Uber, and she was seen on CCTV leaving the bar alone and waiting for her Uber driver outside. This was shortly after 2 a.m. She spoke to her boyfriend Greg on the phone while she was waiting, and CCTV footage captured her kind of looking around, examining every vehicle that passed by to work out whether it was her Uber. And then eventually at 2:12 a.m. her Uber ride arrived. So she hung up the phone to Greg, got into the car, and began the journey back home. Only she never made it there. Samantha Josephson never returned to her campus that night for some reason. In fact, after leaving the bar to catch her Uber in the early hours of that Friday morning, she was never seen alive again. Shortly after 8 a.m. on the 29th of March, Samantha's uni friends woke up and they noticed that Sammy wasn't in her bedroom. In fact, it looked like her bed hadn't even been slept in. So confused, they immediately began trying to text and call her mobile phone, but there was no answer. She wasn't picking up. Now, something that Samantha and her uni friends did often for safety purposes was use the Find My Friends feature on their phones to be able to track each other. So when Sammy didn't answer their calls, they began trying to track her location through Find My Friends. However, they were unsuccessful. For some reason, it just said no location found for Samantha's phone, and it was the same for her boyfriend Greg too. Samantha's uni friends quickly got in touch with Greg when they realized that she never returned home. She was missing, and he too was very worried as he hadn't heard from her. She also wasn't responding to his calls or text messages, and Greg had also been trying to track her phone after she left the bar in the Uber in the early hours of the morning. However, the last time that he was able to track it, it said that her phone was in the opposite direction of where she lived, which confused Greg, obviously. But he thought that maybe she'd gone to a friend's house or something instead of going back to her accommodation, and that this friend lived in that opposite direction. But yeah, by 8 a.m, the Find My Friends feature just kept saying no location found for Sammy, so no one had any clue where she was. Her friends did travel to the location that her phone was last tracked to, the location that Greg gave them, but it was just kind of a random area really. There was no sign of Sammy or her phone. video. They were getting in contact with other friends asking if they had heard from her, but no one had. They also contacted her workplace because she was actually supposed to be in work that morning. Samantha worked part-time at this local sandwich shop. However, when her friends contacted the shop, they learned that she never actually turned up for her shift, which was incredibly out of character for her. And so, not knowing what else to do, her uni friends decided to go to the last place that they knew Samantha definitely was, obviously the Bird Dog Bar at the 5 Points district. You see, Sammy and her uni mates were actually friends with the manager at Bird Dog, so they went to the bar and they asked the manager if they could please have a look at the bar's CCTV footage from the previous night. And when they did, they obviously saw Samantha getting into her Uber and presumably starting the journey home. So armed with this footage, the friends decided that their next port of call had to be going to the police. They just had a gut feeling that something had to be wrong here. Something had to have happened to Sammy. And so, yeah, they contacted the Columbia police and filed a missing persons report. So a missing persons investigation was swiftly launched. Officers informed Samantha's family back in New Jersey about what had happened, that Samantha had disappeared, and as you can imagine, they were extremely worried. So worried, in fact, that her parents, Seymour and Marcy Josephson, immediately jumped in their car and they started driving these 600+ miles to Columbia to help find their daughter and assist with the police investigation. And quickly, detectives made a pretty alarming discovery in this case. Upon looking further into the CCTV footage of Samantha getting into her Uber after leaving the bar that night, they realised that in fact that wasn't her Uber. After all, the car that she'd gotten into, she'd mistaken for her Uber. You see, after she ordered the ride, she was informed that the Uber driver that was going to be picking her up was in a dark coloured Dodge car. So while she was waiting on the side of the road, again, CCTV captured her looking at all of the cars, trying to find the one that she believed was her ride. However, the car that she ended up getting into was not a dark coloured Dodge. It was a dark coloured Chevrolet Impala, a black Chevrolet Impala. Samantha had gotten into the wrong vehicle. She hadn't gotten into an Uber. Her actual Uber driver apparently had to cancel the booking for Samantha because he couldn't find her, which she was completely unaware of. So unbeknownst to her, she'd gotten into a random stranger's car and now she was missing. Now it was looking like that random stranger, whoever was driving that car, may have abducted Samantha that night. Police were dealing with an abduction. And so police began inquiries to try and track this exact black Chevy Impala from earlier that night, track its movements before it picked up Samantha. And through doing this, it looked like the driver may have actually been prowling the area that evening. CCTV cameras nearby captured the same Chevy Impala shortly before 2 a.m. driving constantly around the block in downtown Columbia, around the 5 Points district and around the Bird Dog Bar, almost like the driver, whoever they were, was looking for someone, perhaps looking for a young woman that they could abduct. And then just moments before Samantha got into the vehicle, the Chevy Impala was seen pulling into a parking lot right next to where Samantha was standing outside of the bar waiting for her taxi. It pulled into the parking lot, did a U-turn, and then when it came back out of the parking lot, that was when it pulled up alongside Sammy and she opened the door and got inside. So it almost looked like, again, the driver was prowling the streets around the 5 Points district, perhaps looking for someone that they could kidnap. And then when the driver spotted Samantha standing alone, they quickly turned around in the parking lot and pulled up next to her in the hopes that she would get in. And of course she did. So this footage prior to Samantha's disappearance strongly indicated that if she was abducted that night, then this crime was planned and premeditated. Now, unfortunately, the police couldn't get a good image of the license plate of the black Chevy, nor could they see the person who was driving the car from the footage because the car had tinted windows. And so what they quickly decided to do was put out a BOLA, also a be on the lookout alert to law enforcement across the state to keep an eye out for this specific car. And they also released CCTV footage of the Chevy Impala to the public, asking for anyone who recognised it to come forward. In the meantime, another line of inquiry that the police started looking into was bank records. They looked to see if there had been any activity on Samantha's bank account since her disappearance, and there actually had been. In fact, numerous times someone had tried to use her bank card at various different ATM machines, I believe, after she vanished. However, when the police checked the CCTV cameras from these ATM machines, they discovered that it wasn't Samantha who'd been trying to withdraw money from her bank account. It was an unidentified man who was purposefully covering his face. He was wearing a jacket and he had the hood up and was holding the jacket over his face so that he couldn't be seen. He was trying to hide himself. So was this unidentified man the same individual that picked Samantha up that night? Did he do something to her? Was he the one who kidnapped her and possibly killed her? Was foul play involved in her disappearance? Well, it didn't take long for the answer to that question to come to light, as that same day that Samantha vanished and was reported as missing, the 29th of March 2019, police received reports of a body having been found. On the afternoon of the 29th, at around 3:45 p.m, a couple of turkey hunters were walking through this wooded area in New Zion, which is a town located in Clarendon County in South Carolina. It's about 65 miles away from Columbia. They were walking through this wooded area when they made the most devastating and horrific discovery. They discovered the dead body of a young woman. She was absolutely covered in blood and she had stab wounds all over her. So the turkey hunters quickly called the police, and when they arrived at the scene, they felt pretty certain, just from looking at the body of this young woman, that it had to be 21-year-old Samantha Josephson, who vanished the night before. The clothes that the victim was wearing exactly matched the clothes that Samantha had on during her night out. The victim had long dark hair just like Samantha, so they knew that it was her. This missing persons investigation had now turned into a murder inquiry, and Samantha's family were informed of the utterly heartbreaking news that Samantha was never coming home. She was dead. And I cannot even begin to comprehend how harrowing it must have been for them when they learned not only that Samantha had been killed, but also when they learned how she had been killed. I mean, her cause of death was just horrific. Her murder was so incredibly violent. As I said, when Samantha was found, she was covered in blood and she had so many stab wounds to her body. Now, it was determined that she hadn't been murdered where she was found. She had been killed elsewhere, and then her body was brought to this location, this wooded area in New Zealand. But when her body was taken for an autopsy, the coroner established that Samantha had sustained more than 120 stab wounds to her body in total. 120. She'd been stabbed all over. She had stab wounds in her leg, her chest area, her feet, her shoulders, her torso. She had stab wounds in her face and her neck, and it was determined that she'd been stabbed with some kind of double-bladed knife. She did have what looked like self-defense injuries. According to one source, she even had stab wounds which went all the way through her hands, where she'd clearly raised her hands to try and defend and shield herself from the knife. The amount of stab wounds that she'd sustained meant that her body was practically completely drained of all of her blood. In fact, the coroner established that she only had about 20 milliliters of blood left in her body, which is the equivalent of like 1.3 tablespoons. And bear in mind, the human body typically holds about 4 to 5 litres of blood, a gallon, and Samantha had bled so much that she only had just over a tablespoon of blood left in her body. She bled out that much, and this was no quick death either. Whilst the stab wounds had been inflicted very quickly and very rapidly, the coroner established that it would have taken taken somewhere between 10 to 20 minutes for Samantha to actually die, which is just horrendous to think about, to imagine the agony and pain and fear that she was subjected to for at least 10 whole minutes, possibly double. There was no evidence of a sexual assault on Samantha's body. Of course, that doesn't necessarily rule out a sexual motive. Perhaps the killer intended to sexually assault her, but because she was putting up so much of a fight, he was unable to. Or perhaps he got sexual gratification just from committing such a vicious and violent crime. Or maybe the motive for the attack was something else entirely. At this moment in time, the police had no idea why this had happened, what the reason for this incredibly brutal murder was. But upon finding Samantha's body, they immediately began their investigation to identify the perpetrator and get justice for Samantha Josephson. So their inquiries continued to try and locate that black Chevy Impala. As we know, police put out a bolo, they appealed to the public, and actually they did receive one tip from the employees at a local Wendy's restaurant. They recalled a black Chevy Impala coming through their drive-through window at around midday on the 29th of March. The car was being driven by a young black male, and the person who served him at the drive-through actually noticed that he had a white sheet covering the back seat of his vehicle, which of course seemed a bit suspicious to them. What was he trying to hide underneath this white sheet? So yeah, these Wendy's employees immediately contacted the police about this sighting of the black Chevy Impala, just in case it was the same one that they were looking for in relation to Samantha's case. But as it turns out, the hunt for the black Chevy wouldn't be a long one. You see, in the early hours of the morning on the 30th of March 2019, so less than 24 hours after Samantha was killed and her body was found, patrol officers who were driving around the 5 Points district, so around the same area where Sammy was last seen, just so happened to spot a car that looked exactly like the one they were looking for, also cruising around the area. And so the patrol officers immediately pulled this car over, ordered the driver to stop. This was at around 2:30 in the morning. The black Chevy pulled over, and inside of the vehicle were two people, a young man and a young woman. The young man was the one driving, so the police asked him for his license. He said that he didn't actually have one, he didn't have his license on him. I'm assuming that the officers could smell marijuana coming from the car because they asked who had been smoking marijuana, and the young man said that he had smoked some earlier in the day. And so the police asked him to step out of the vehicle, and that was when things took a turn. The young man opened the car door and got out, and that was when the officer said to him, quote, "Okay, here's the deal, man. I pulled your car over because it matches a suspect." And before he could even finish his sentence, the officer noticed that the young man's hands were in his pockets, and so of course he immediately told him to take them out of his pockets, I imagine thinking that he could have had some kind of weapon in them. And that was when this young man turned around and just legged it. He immediately started running as fast as he could away from the officers. So of course, the officers immediately ran after him in pursuit. They alerted other officers who were nearby on their radio that they were chasing a man wearing a grey tracksuit, and thankfully he was eventually caught. The young man actually ran right into other officers who were in the direction that he was running, and they managed to apprehend him, and by 3 a.m. he'd been arrested and he was taken into custody. Meanwhile, as all of that was going on, other officers began speaking to the young woman that was in the passenger seat of his car. She was an acquaintance of his, and they asked her for the name of the young man that had just run off, and she said that his name was Nate. The driver of the black Chevy Impala was eventually identified as being 24-year-old Nathaniel Rowland. He was from South Carolina. He actually lived with his parents in New Zion in South Carolina, the same town where Samantha's body was found, so he was very familiar with the location. He was previously a student at the East Clarendon School, and according to reports, he had even attended the South Carolina State University at one point, although he was no longer a student by the spring of 2019, and I don't believe he had a job. I couldn't find any information about any employment, so I think he was unemployed at this time. He did have a criminal record, but only for one offence. In October of 2018, he was arrested for obtaining a signature or or property under false pretenses. Although I don't believe he served any prison time for this, it did seem to be a relatively minor offence. I mean, to most people, Nathaniel Rowland just seemed like a relatively normal, friendly guy. But now he'd kind of become a suspect in a murder investigation, and of course the fact that he tried to run doesn't really look good, definitely makes it seem as though he has something to hide, doesn't it? As Nathaniel Rowland was being arrested and taken into custody, officers at the scene with his car started looking around it, having a look inside the car to see if they could find anything alarming or incriminating, and my god, they did. They found a pink iPhone and a set of pink keys which were labelled room. These items were later confirmed to have belonged to murdered woman Samantha Josephson. Samantha's phone and keys that she had on her the night that she disappeared were in Nathaniel Rowland's car. But that wasn't all the police found in his vehicle. They also found blood. Huge amounts of blood. Police shone their torches into his car and there was just blood everywhere, all over the passenger seat, the back seat. There was blood in the trunk. In fact, there was so much blood in this vehicle that it had literally soaked right through the seats. It was clear that this was a crime scene. This was the scene where Samantha Josephson had died. She'd been murdered in this car. DNA testing would later confirm that the blood in the vehicle was Samantha's. But it did appear as though Nathaniel Rowland had made some effort to clean up the blood. In the trunk, they also discovered some cleaning product. They found window cleaner, some bleach, and some wipes, which also had blood on. So yeah, it looked like he had attempted to wipe up some of the blood. It was also found that the child locks on the doors of Rowland's car had been activated, so you know, if he was trapping someone inside, they had no way of escape. Samantha would have had no way to escape. However, even more evidence found in the car strongly indicated that she had tried her absolute hardest to escape that vehicle. Chillingly, something else that was discovered in the car, actually on the back window, was a footprint, as if someone had been kicking the back window with their bare foot in a desperate attempt to break it. This footprint was, of course, later matched to Samantha Josephson. She was trying so hard to break that window with her foot and get out of that car, probably when she realised that the child locks were on and that the doors wouldn't open. It was clear that Samantha had been in a violent struggle for her life in that vehicle, but I mean, really, she stood no chance. Again, she was just trapped. After Nathaniel Rowland was taken into custody, police tried to question him about the murder of Samantha Josephson. However, he completely denied it. Despite the fact that huge amounts of blood, her blood and her belongings were found in his car, he said, nope, wasn't me, I had no involvement in her death. And so the police had to continue with finding evidence to build their case against him. Now, something else that was found in his car was a piece of paper, and on this piece of paper, someone, presumably Nathaniel, had written a list of things like duct tape, gloves, gasoline, matches, all black. To the police, it kind of looked like this was a list of things that he would need if he was going to carry out a crime such as this one. He would need gloves, he would need duct tape, he would need to wear all black. So again, it indicates that Samantha's murder was possibly premeditated. He was writing down everything that he would require in order to commit this crime. They also found another piece of paper in his vehicle which looked to be some kind of eviction notice, eviction letter, and this led the police to the home of a woman named Maria Howard, who just so happened to be the girlfriend of Nathaniel Rowland. He lived with his parents in New Zealand, but also he would stay with his girlfriend Maria a lot, and she lived in Colombia. And so the police got a search warrant and they decided to search this house, Maria's house, to see if they could find any evidence in there which linked Nathaniel to the crime. And sure enough, they did. They searched the garbage bins outside of the house, and in there they found some very, very incriminating items. They found some blood-stained clothing, which police determined belonged to Nathaniel Rowland and which he had been seen wearing on the day that Samantha was murdered. And of course, the blood on this clothing was confirmed to have come from Samantha, and they also discovered a knife, a two-bladed knife, just like the knife that had been used to stab Samantha to death. And this knife also had traces of her blood on it. Police had found the murder weapon in a bin outside of Nathaniel's girlfriend's home. This was even more damning evidence against him. Speaking of his girlfriend, Maria Howard, the police took statements from her, and she actually told them that the day after Samantha Josephson was killed, she recalled having seen her boyfriend Nathaniel Rowland wearing rubber gloves and attempting to clean his vehicle. She also remembered seeing him with the murder weapon, the double-bladed knife, and I think she said that he tried to clean that. She told the police that after the killing, her daughter got into Nathaniel's car, and when she got out, she noticed that she had blood on her shoes. And Maria asked Nathaniel about all of these things, the knife, the blood on her daughter's shoes. She asked him why he was cleaning his car, but every single time he would just tell her to, quote, mind her own business. Maria also informed them that she had seen a white sheet covering the back seat of his car, just like the white sheet that the Wendy's employees described. And Maria told the police that she had seen on the news that the authorities were looking for a black Chevy Impala car in relation to the case of a missing and, as it would turn out, murdered young woman. And she did become suspicious of her boyfriend. She did begin to connect the dots because obviously he owned this exact car and, you know, the blood and the knife and everything. However, she told the detectives that she didn't go to the police because she was just too scared. She was scared of her boyfriend. She feared for not only her life but also her daughter's life, what Nathaniel might do to them if she did go to law enforcement. So the evidence against Nathaniel Rowland was overwhelming. There was no doubt in the detectives' minds that he was the one who did this to Samantha Josephson. He was the one who killed her that night. Why exactly he did this was still unclear. His motive behind this murder, police did not know, but the evidence proved to them that he was the perpetrator, and so he was soon charged. He was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson, as well as the possession of a weapon during the commission of a crime. Despite the abundance of evidence, Nathaniel Rowland continued to protest his innocence, and so he pleaded not guilty to the charges, meaning that the case had to go to trial. And his trial began in July of 2021, more than 2 years after Samantha's death. I would imagine that the pandemic was the reason for the delay. Now, despite the fact that the prosecution obviously had many different pieces of evidence against Rowland, from the CCTV footage, the fact that he tried to run, the blood in his car and Samantha's belongings, the list of suspicious items that he'd written, the murder weapon, his blood-stained clothing, despite all of this evidence, there was something that did make his defence's argument a pretty strong one too, and that was the fact that none of Nathaniel Rowland's DNA was actually found on Samantha Josephson's body. The defense argued during the trial that that meant that Rowland couldn't have possibly been the killer because, as we know from Samantha's injuries and the amount of blood in the car, there was a violent struggle between her and her attacker. So how could it have been Rowland if none of his DNA was found on her? The defense acknowledged that whilst it was clear that Samantha's murder had taken place in Nathaniel's car, that doesn't necessarily prove that he was the one who did it. They tried to claim that perhaps someone else was driving his car that night and that they were in fact the perpetrator. The defense also argued the fact that when Nathaniel was arrested less than 24 hours after Samantha was killed, there was no evidence of injury on his body. And again, they said that if there was a violent struggle, wouldn't he have been injured? Wouldn't there be some scratches or marks on his body? Wouldn't his DNA be underneath Samantha's fingernails? I mean, it's a fair point, a solid argument. However, the prosecution could come back at this with an explanation for the lack of DNA. You remember we discussed how in the garbage bin outside of Nathaniel's girlfriend's house, the police found a load of Nathaniel's clothing which was stained with Samantha's blood. Well, one piece of clothing that they found in the bin was a black leather jacket that belonged to Nathaniel, and the prosecution were able to show the jury during the trial that there were what looked like scratch marks on this jacket. So if Nathaniel was wearing this jacket when he was killing Samantha, it makes sense, doesn't it, why his DNA wouldn't have been under her nails. She couldn't get to his skin to be able to scratch him because he was wearing this thick leather jacket, so she was just scratching at that. As for the lack of injuries to his body, I mean, yes, Samantha had put up a fight, but let's not forget that he was the one who had the weapon here. He had a double-bladed knife, so chances are she's not going to be able to inflict many, if any, injuries on him because he was the one who was armed. And speaking of the knife, whilst none of Nathaniel's DNA was found on Samantha's body, scientists did find traces of both his DNA and Samantha's DNA on the knife. His DNA was on the murder weapon as well as the victim's. How else do you explain that other than he had to be the killer? The prosecution had a number of witnesses testify during the trial, one of their main witnesses being Nathaniel's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend Maria. She very bravely took to the stand and told the jury about how she saw Nathaniel with the knife, how she saw him cleaning his car, etc, etc. Another witness who was brought forward was actually the shop owner of this local cell phone repair shop, and he testified during the trial that the morning after Samantha was killed, Nathaniel Rowland had come into his shop and he tried to sell him Samantha's mobile phone, the phone that was later found by the police in his car. He obviously didn't end up selling it to the shop owner because he wasn't happy with the price that he offered to pay for it, but this was proof that, again, he was trying to dispose of evidence after the crime by attempting to sell his victim's belongings. It was the prosecution's case that Nathaniel Rowland planned this crime. He planned to go out that night in search for someone, some young woman that he could abduct. Why, again, we don't know, but in search for a victim, he was cruising around the 5 Points district in his black Chevy Impala, as seen on the CCTV footage. He was prowling the area. I would imagine that he chose to cruise around this spot knowing that it would be full of college students, young college students who were likely very drunk and therefore vulnerable. And lucky for him, he didn't have to try and convince one of them to get into his car because Samantha got in willingly, having mistaken his vehicle for her Uber. However, it's believed that it probably wouldn't have taken Samantha very long to realise that Nathaniel wasn't actually the Uber ride she'd booked, as he started driving the two of them in the opposite direction of her home, her uni accommodation. And at this point, she likely would have started to panic, realising that she'd been abducted and she was in danger. And I'm sure she would have been panicking even more when she discovered that she was trapped in this car. The doors wouldn't open, the child locks were on, and it's likely that the violent struggle between her and Nathaniel began when Sammy started trying to escape the vehicle. As we know, she was kicking the back window with her bare foot, trying to break the glass, trying to break free. She was trying to scratch at Rowland, his jacket, to fight him off, but as we discussed, she stood no chance against him and his double-bladed knife. In a frenzied attack, Nathaniel Rowland stabbed Samantha more than 120 times, and of course with every jab of the knife, every stab wound, she would have been getting weaker and weaker because of the blood loss, until eventually, after 10 to 20 minutes, she died in that car, died at just 21 years old. Following her death, Nathaniel drove her body to his hometown of New Zeon and just callously dumped her in a wooded area there, where she was later found by those turkey hunters. And then we know that, again, Nathaniel Rowland made an effort to try and cover up this crime in the aftermath, from trying to sell Samantha's phone to putting the knife and bloodstained clothing in the garbage bin, attempting to clean his car. He also tried to steal from her, withdraw money from her bank account, so perhaps that was the motive for this crime, robbery. Why he decided to return to the 5 Points district area the night after he killed Samantha, we don't know. As we discussed earlier, how he was caught was he was pulled over by patrol officers after they saw him in his black Chevy Impala driving around the 5 Points district in the early hours of the 30th of March. It's very, very odd that he would return to the area just the night after he committed committed this crime, especially because he likely would have seen all over the news that the police were looking for his car. But I guess thank God that he did. Thank God that he did return, and he was arrested very soon after carrying out this crime. The trial of Nathaniel Rowland came to a close on the 27th of July 2021, and it took the jury only about an hour, just over an hour, to deliberate before they returned with their verdict of guilty. They had found 27-year-old Nathaniel Rowland guilty of all 3 charges: possession of a weapon during the violent crime and the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, so he would never be let out. Despite the guilty verdict, Rowland still protested his innocence during his sentencing. I have a quote from him here. He spoke at his sentencing and he said, "Your Honour, I know I'm innocent, but I guess what I know and what I think really doesn't matter. I just wish the state would have done more in finding out who the actual person was instead of being satisfied with detaining me and proving my guilt." Nathaniel Rowland's mother, Loretta, also spoke during her son's sentencing. She too tried to protest his innocence. However, she was actually stopped by the judge. The judge told Loretta that he wouldn't hear of it. He wouldn't hear of any claim that Nathaniel was innocent because he'd been found guilty. So he wasn't going to allow her to stand there in front of Samantha's family and say that he was innocent. I mean, clearly his mother was just in complete denial that her son had done this, despite all of the damning evidence which proved that he had. But yes, anyway, Nathaniel Rowland was sentenced to life and sent off to prison. He did try to appeal his conviction, but of course he was rejected, and so he remains in prison to this day. In the aftermath of Samantha's murder, her heartbroken family, the Josephson family, decided that more needed to be done when it came to educating people, young people especially, college students like Samantha, on the importance of rideshare safety, because as we know, Samantha mistook Nathaniel Rowland's car for her Uber that night. It's likely that she probably opened his car door, asked him if he was there to pick up Samantha, and when he lied and said yes, she willingly got in. And so, after her murder, the Josephsons decided to launch the, quote, "What's My Name Foundation" as a legacy to Sammy, encouraging people who order Ubers or rideshares or taxis to make sure that they actually check that the car they're about to get into is there for them, and that the driver is not some random stranger. Instead of opening a taxi door and asking the driver if they're there for, you know, whoever, if they're there for Samantha, open the door and ask the driver, "Who are you here to pick up? What's my name? What's the name of the person you are giving a ride to? And if they can't give you that information, don't get into the vehicle." Which I just think is so important, and it's something that, I'll be honest, I wouldn't have really thought to do before researching this case, but it makes so much sense to do that, doesn't it? Of course, it goes without saying that what happened to Samantha that night is not her fault at all. She made a mistake and accidentally got into the wrong car, but still, this should not have happened to her. But the Josephson family just hope that the What's My Name Foundation will save the lives of other people, will prevent them from putting themselves in potential danger by checking the details of the car, checking the details of the Uber or rideshare that they're getting into. In addition to this, Samantha's family also campaigned for policies to be put in place to enhance the safety of rideshare and taxi passengers. And in June of 2019, the Samantha Josephson Ride-Sharing Safety Act was signed into law in South Carolina, which requires rideshare vehicles to display license plate numbers on the front of their car, and it also subjects people who misrepresent themselves as an authorized rideshare business or taxi business to a fine of around $500, and they could even face jail time for such an offence. Sammy's law was also passed in the state of New Jersey, where Samantha was obviously originally from, and the law in New Jersey requires rideshare companies to issue 2 credential place cards on their vehicles, which must have the driver's name and photo on it, as well as their license plate, so that, again, customers can check that they're actually getting into the correct car. Anne Seymour and Marcy Josephson even worked with lawmakers in the United States Congress to craft a federal law named after Sammy to improve rideshare safety. So they've really achieved so much in Samantha's name, again, as a legacy for her, which is incredible. Just a couple of months after Samantha's murder, in May of 2019, Samantha was awarded a posthumous political science degree at what would have been her graduation ceremony. She couldn't be there herself to receive her diploma, so her family made sure that they were there to receive it for her. It's just such a shame that she couldn't go on to fulfill her dreams of going to law school and becoming a lawyer. Samantha was clearly one of those people that you could just tell was going to go so far in life, achieve so much. She was so bright and intelligent and had such a promising future ahead of her, and that was all cruelly snatched away, taken away at just 21 years old. She was barely even an adult. But that concludes this case, the very, very sad case of Samantha Josephson. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case down below in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys think. And also feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Again, you can pop them in the comments down below. Or alternatively, you can go through my case request form, which is always linked in the description box. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie. Bye.